Thank you very much, Natalia. Thank you very much, Nicola Tresi, for putting this wonderful program together. And thank you to Art Fair Tokyo for inviting us to this series of talks. And of course, it's my real pleasure to speak with all the artists today. It's a real honor to have you all. Prvacki, Koki Tanaka, Marinella, Senatore, and Augustas Serapinas. Wonderful to see you. Some of us early in the morning. Thanks for getting up so early. And I think we are all now joining together because we have common interests. The series is called Artists and Communities, and we want to speak about artists who have a communal practice, who are interested in engaging with other people, with people that are part of other societies, other social endangered immigration groups, or whatever the possible interests may be. What's really nice is, of course, to also debunk the myth of the solitary artists. I think the solitary artist working in the studio alone is more of a myth. It exists, but it's more of a myth than reality. I think studio practice, larger studio practice, has existed since the beginning of time. But of course, there is a pivotal change, I think, in the practice of artists today, in terms of the cross-disciplinary interests. And I think we're all multidimensional people that realize that telling our stories need many, many different media. And it's very wonderful to see here that everybody who speaks here today has an extremely broad interest, from theater to architecture, to literature, to choreography, you name it. And all the artists today here fuse these different interests together. And of course, through this very wide application of medium, there is, of course, also the urge and the wish and the need to collaborate with other people to make sort of these projects, ideas, and visions come to life. So everybody who's working here often incorporates a lot of different people, hires actors, hires performers, musicians. And I think it's interesting to hear how this kind of outward-looking act is becoming more and more important, especially in the post-pandemic world, where you know, for a while there we had a hard time actually being able to work with people and getting work as support to make our projects run, and not to drive ourselves insane in our studios, locked in our studios. I think being able to collaborate all around the world more and more easily now through the technology we have is a wonderful thing. So I would love to start asking Koki Tanaka, since we are part of the Art Fair Tokyo. I would love to first ask you the first question. And I think I'll be asking everybody the first question, and we can take then also open the conversation between each other if there is a wish. Otherwise, there's plenty of material we can speak about. We only have 1 hour, so I'm sure we're going to run short of time. So Koki, thank you very much for being here. We might as well dive straight in. I think, again, you have a wonderful way of searching for not lost histories, but for histories that sometimes are not so easy. And you had a beautiful show at the Meader Museum in Switzerland in 2018 called Vulnerable Histories. And within there, you sort of made display of architecture. And from that on, you had this beautiful way of speaking about seeing yourself not as a classical architect, but as an architect to create environments where you can have communities and people gather inside to tell their stories, and maybe stories that are usually from the mainstream media are not yet necessarily covered. And so I would love you to say something about maybe these social studies that you conduct.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for inviting me to have this conversation. I'm glad that I'm joining this conversation because I'm not really, let's say, involving the art scene in Tokyo. I'm actually based in Kyoto, so it's nice to be also engaged with the Tokyo art scene and also the European context with you guys in this platform. So first, I I actually don't remember that I say I'm as an architect in a way that what I'm doing. I remember that I say myself as a coordinator rather than creating something as an artist. So, and I think probably I say somewhere to think about my practice as the architect. Actually, when I did the project in Hakave last year, one of the speaker told me that you are one of the architects that create the space for Hakave to host the different people to interact. So I try to, let's say, explain about this idea of the creating the space versus the community itself. But maybe I can just quickly explain about the vulnerable histories at the Migros Museum, which is about the Zainichi Korean issue in Japan. Zainichi Korean is the specific term which related to the Korean diaspora in Japan. That's the one of the main target by the ultra nationalist group. So it's a racism in Japan. One of the reasons why I did this project in Switzerland, Migros Museum, I was thinking about the this idea, kind of like a comparison between the abstract and the individual concreteness. So when we talk about like community, we always community is always tied with the local problems, right? So it's like if you are not from, let's say, Japan, you are not hardly heard the term Zainichi Korean. So community is always it's hard to dive into the different communities if you are not in that community. So one of my idea of using the abstract, which I think that racism is everywhere, right-wing movement is everywhere in the world. So I try to look at this Zainichi Korean issue, the racism issue in Japan, to reflect this idea of ultranationalism and racism in the world. So the vulnerable histories is, of course, it's related to the very personal or individual problems, but at the same time, it's also touch upon the historical moment of the Korean massacre after the Great Kanto earthquake. And this is one of the reference to the current issue of the hate speech in Japan. So I try to stitch or jump into the current issue and the historical issue together through this project, Vulnerable Histories, because everywhere you can find a similar structure, like the historical problem appears again and again in the current problem. So
how do you, if I may ask, how do you enter these communities that you're not part of when you say it's difficult to enter them?
Yes.
What is your approach when you
Sure. Actually, it's quite a personal relationship with one Zainichi Korean sociologist who were one of the participants in my previous project. We met, like, she just joined my project 2016 by chance. Then we become friends. Then I thought that I know the history of the Zainichi Korean a little bit, but through her, I learn a lot. So I thought that it's important to face this issue when I back to Japan, because I was in Los Angeles for some years. Then once I back to Japan, I realized that this racism issue is like huge in Japan. So I asked my friend, the Zainichi Korean sociologist, to how we can, let's say, tackle this issue. And she became an advisor for entire project. So it's like I say, it's about the in a way, global issue, but at the same time, very local and also personal to me.
Yeah, and in Zurich was very nice because you actually made the portrait of two protagonists, right? It was a Korean Japanese woman meeting a Swiss Japanese American man,
Yes,
correct?
yeah, yes.
And they met and they exchanged, and I think it's very nice how you built this framework. You know, on the one hand, it was, as you call it, the road movie. It was kind of a documentary following these two protagonists, and at the same time in the show, you have sort of these paddles and structures where you portray things a bit more neutral, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
And so I think you have it's a sort of a document, almost a quasi documentary style.
Sure.
Again,
yeah.
Which is nice. You know, you're not imposing. It doesn't seem like you're imposing a very forceful opinion one way or the other. You're just laying down the facts.
Yeah, actually, the Christian, the Swiss Japanese American person, he's kind of like a guide. He's kind of like a person who don't know much about the issue. So he when he met the Zainichi Korean woman, he's the person who more attached to the audience, I think, because like I say, it's hard to understand the things far away. So through his eye, audience can understand the situation in Japan.
Mm-hmm. It's very nice, which is a nice thing we get to later as well. I think once everybody said something about the work, is of course always the contrast also between what you're producing and you're trying to convey. And I think it's interesting to also speak about how people perceive your work, you know, and what your perception is of a more public perception. And I think so. I think that's very nice. Thank you so much for.
Thank you.
Anna Prvacki. I don't know where to start with you. There's so many interesting different pointers you put out there. You know, you're calling yourself a cross-pollinator. You have a very multidisciplinary upbringing. I read that you moved with your family from ex-Yugoslavia to Singapore, I think, back in the day. And you were also trained as a musician. And I think right now, of course, I love the fact, because I'm myself very much interested in bees and nature, you know, to speak about your current interest, or it might already be a long time, about the bee community, which you also made part of your most recent Gropiusbau digital artist residency. But if you could just maybe speak a little bit about what you personally feel as you're a beekeeper as well, and from what I understand, and what learning from this bee community maybe brings you personally in your artistic practice working with communities.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so happy to join you, and thank you. Everyone pronounced my name so well. I'm very grateful for that. Yeah, I mean. Just to be clear that I'm not a practicing beekeeper at the moment. I'm more of a conceptual beekeeper. I did study beekeeping with my grandfather, and it was a very important and beautiful experience witnessing as a child. And it really came back when my grandfather passed away about 15 years ago, and he left me 500 kilos of honey as my inheritance. And it was this moment where, like, okay, so I'm an artist, I should do something with this. And I went through all sorts of different possibilities of what happens with the honey. But it actually really influenced my art practice in a profound way. So I have been making work about bees and honey since then. Besides doing a lot of other things. I'm a bit of a generalist, which is why I was thinking of this idea of a cross-pollinator, and this kind of idea of spreading, you know, almost like a meme in its initial scientific sense of cultural contagion. And of course, like bees are so, bees are so incredibly fascinating. And it's also very interesting how we all project ourselves onto bees. Bees have been claimed by everybody, anarchists, monarchists. Napoleon had it embroidered on his clothes, fascists. Everybody likes to see themselves in bees. And I think it's also really interesting because bees are both, yes, very collective, very self-sacrificing, very strategic, very disciplined, but they're also just pleasure-seeking, horny little pollinators that just go from flower to flower and, rub themselves into it. So I quite like that idea of promiscuity in a conceptual sense.
Very nice. And how does this now relate to your latest residency at the Gropius Bau in Berlin?